Her husband sold her for his debts. The cowboy bought her freedom and gave his name. The bidding had already started when Reuben Cross pushed open the door of the Dusty Creek trading post and walked into the worst thing he had seen in 3 years of riding the territories. A woman stood on a dry goods crate in the center of the room with her wrists tied together in front of her with a length of rope and a bruise along her jaw that was fresh enough to still be darkening at the edges. 6 men sat on barrels and upturned buckets arranged in a loose half-circle with their drinks and their attention pointed at the crate. And a man with a ledger book was calling numbers from behind the wooden counter the way you call numbers when you're selling livestock at market, except what was on the crate was not livestock. Reuben did not say anything. He stood inside the door and took the room apart piece by piece with his eyes. The woman on the crate was watching him. She had the controlled stillness of someone who had already been to the worst of their fear and come out the other side into something harder and colder and more useful. Her eyes said she was not waiting to be rescued. Her eyes said she was waiting for an opportunity and would handle it herself if one did not arrive from the outside. He respected that immediately and without reservation. The man with the ledger was named Silas Pratt, which Reuben knew because the name had been attached to small dishonest things across 2 counties for the better part of a year. The kind of dishonesty that never quite became a crime, but that left a residue wherever it passed through. Pratt was not the husband. The husband was a man sitting on a barrel near the window with his hat pushed back and his boots crossed and the expression of someone who had already spent the money in his head and was just waiting for the counting to finish. Reuben did not know his name yet, but he knew the type, and the type was the worst kind of coward there was, the particular kind that converted cruelty into transaction, so that it could feel like business rather than what it actually was, which was a man using a piece of paper to do something that a piece of paper could not make decent no matter how many signatures were on it. The current bid was $30. Reuben walked to the counter without hurrying and stood at the end of it where he could see the whole room. He said $45, and he said it in the flat, unhurried voice that certain men have, the kind of voice that cuts through the noise of a room without needing to be raised, and every head in the place turned toward him at the same moment. Pratt looked at him. The husband looked at him. The 6 men on their barrels and buckets looked at him and tried to decide what they were seeing. What they were seeing was a man who was 6 feet tall, with a working rancher's frame and a face that had been outside in every kind of weather for 15 years and eyes that were currently doing the cold and specific work of making every person in the room understand that the number it said was not an opening position. Someone bid 50. Reuben did not look at who said it. 70, Reuben said. The room went quiet. The husband sat up straighter on his barrel. Pratt ran his pen down the ledger page with the look of a man who is very pleased with how his afternoon is going. Nobody bid against 70. Reuben paid it in coin and a promissory note on his ranch account in the town of Halston, which Pratt accepted because Reuben Calver's account in Halston was known to be good. He walked to the crate and looked at the woman and said, "My name is Reuben Cross. I have a knife. Do you want the rope cut, or would you like to do it yourself?" She looked at him. "Give me the knife," she said. He handed it to her handle first without comment. She took it, turned the blade to the rope between her wrists, and cut through it in 4 clean seconds. She handed the knife back, folded the cut rope once and dropped it on the crate, and stepped down the floor without using the hand he had half extended to assist her. "Flora Medina," she said. "That is my name, and I can walk without help." "Where do you want to go?" Reuben said. She looked at the husband by the window. The husband had not moved from his barrel, but had gone very still in the way of a man who is calculating whether the situation still works in his favor and arriving at an answer he does not like. "Away from here," Flora said, "as far as your horse will carry us." Reuben took 1 step toward the husband on the barrel. He did not raise his voice. "You will not follow us," he said. "If you do, what you did today will be the least of your problems. I have a very good memory, and I know what a territorial court looks like from inside." The husband said nothing. He was a man who functioned on the assumption that other people would move when he pushed, and he was looking at someone who was not moving and who had the focused patience of a person who had been pushed by harder men than him and had not moved for any of them either. Reuben and Flora walked out of the Dusty Creek, trading posts into the afternoon sun, and got on his horse and rode north. They were 4 miles out from Dusty Creek before Flora said anything. The land had opened up around them into the wide, shallow country of the northern valley, and the road had thinned from packed dirt to a two-rut trail through the grass before she spoke. She said, "You spent $70. "Yes," Reuben said. "Why?" she said. It was not a gentle or grateful question. It was direct and careful, the kind that comes from someone who has been offered reasons before that turn out to be wrong, and who has decided not to accept explanations at face value anymore. Because it was the only legal mechanism available to end what was happening in that room, Reuben said, and because everyone else in that room had already decided it was not their concern. "You do not know me," she said. "That is correct," he said, without elaboration. "And still you spent $70, she said. "The money is recoverable," Reuben said. "What was happening to you in that room was not. What I am thinking about right now is whether the man on the barrel is the kind who takes a clear message and applies it, or the kind who needs the message repeated." Flora was quiet for a moment. "His name is Denton Price," she said. "He has owed money to Silas Pratt for 8 months. He has owed money to other people before Pratt, and he will owe money to others after. The debt is not the point. The debt is just the reason he chose this time." "Has he done this before?" Reuben said. "He has threatened it before," she said. "Today was the first time he followed through. Then he is escalating," Reuben said, "which means he will not take instruction." She had nothing to add to that because it was accurate. Reuben's ranch sat at the end of a long valley in the northern part of the county, backed against a ridge of red rock that broke the prevailing wind and caught the afternoon light in a way that made the whole face of the ridge go amber in the last hour of the day. It was not the largest operation in the county, but it was a clean and ordered one, the kind of place that shows the character of the person running it the way a kept tool shows the character of the craftsman who owns it. The fences were straight. The barn was sound. The yard had no clutter. Flora saw it all as they came over the last rise and descended toward it, and she was quiet for a moment in a way that had nothing to do with having nothing to say. "You can stay in the main house," Reuben said. "There's a room that locks from the inside. I sleep in the bunkhouse when I have hands on, and right now I have 2 men here, Ernesto and his brother Marco. They are good men, and you will not have any trouble from them." Flora looked at the ranch below them. "I am not someone you need to take care of," she said. "I know that," Reuben said. "You cut that rope in 4 seconds. I am offering you a place to stand while you figure out what you do next. Those are different things." She accepted the distinction without argument because it was the right one. Ernesto Garza met them in the yard when they came through the gate. He was a man of about 40 with a broad and quiet face and the economical, unhurried way of moving that belongs to people who have been working the same ground for enough years that they no longer have to think about where things are or what needs doing next. He looked at Flora and then at Reuben with the particular look that asks a question without putting it into words. Reuben gave him a short answer in 3 sentences, and Ernesto nodded, and that was the end of the discussion. Marco Garza was 26 and had the same quality of steady discretion that made his older brother reliable, and he showed Flora the water pump and the kitchen storage and the layout of the main house with the practical efficiency of someone pointing out features of a place where a person actually intends to live, and then he went back to the fence post he had been working on. The first night passed without any disturbance. The second night Denton Price arrived, which was earlier than Reuben had expected, but not earlier than he had prepared for. Price came at 2 a.m. with a man Reuben did not recognize riding a gray horse beside him. The 2 of them came through the south gate, which turned out to be a serious mistake in planning, because Ernesto Garza slept in the small room at the top of the south barn and had developed over 20 years of ranch work, the kind of hearing that picks up sound the way still water picks up the first drop of rain, completely and without missing anything. Ernesto woke Reuben. Reuben woke Marco. The 3 of them were in position around the yard before Price had made it 20 feet past the gate. Reuben stepped out of the shadow of the water trough and said, "You were told." Price pulled his horse up. The man beside him had not expected company and showed it. "She is my wife," Price said. "I have legal standing." "You have a debt record and a witness list," Reuben said. "I have 3 people who were in that trading post today, including the woman you put on that crate. And I have a letter already sitting with Sheriff Octavio Luna in Halston that describes this afternoon in exact detail." Luna received it by fast rider at 6 this evening. Price went still. The law in this territory, Reuben continued, does not recognize the sale of a person regardless of what Silas Pratt's ledger says. What it does recognize is a formal complaint backed by witnesses. You rode here tonight to take back something that was never yours to sell. Luna knows your name and your direction. If you ride away right now, you might be in a better position tomorrow morning than you're going to be if you take one more step toward this house. The man beside Price said something quiet and urgent. Price listened. The arithmetic of the situation was not working in his direction, and he could feel it. He turned his horse and left. The man with him left faster. Reuben stood in the yard until the sound of hooves faded completely into the dark. Then he looked at Ernesto, and Ernesto nodded once and went back to the barn. Flora was standing on the porch. She had heard everything. Luna is a real sheriff, she said. Octavio Luna has been the law in Halston for 9 years, Reuben said. And the letter is real. I sent it before we sat down to supper. She looked at him across the dark yard. You planned ahead, she said. I think ahead, he said. It is a habit. Sheriff Luna arrived the following afternoon with a deputy and paperwork that had the weight of the territorial court behind it. He was a patient, deliberate man who sat at Reuben's kitchen table and took Flora's full statement in careful longhand and asked clear questions and wrote down every answer. He explained that what Price had done at the trading post constituted a criminal act under territorial statute, and that Silas Pratt was facing his own accounting for his role in it. Luna looked at Flora when he had finished writing and said the process would take time, but that the evidence was solid and the outcome would hold. He said it plainly, without false comfort or excessive qualification, which told Flora he was a man who had learned that straight information was a form of respect. She asked how long the process would take. Luna said 60 days for the initial proceedings before the territorial court, and that the full formal dissolution of the marriage would follow that, if she chose to pursue it. She said she did, immediately and without any hesitation at all, and Luna wrote that down too. After Luna rode out with his deputy and his paperwork, the ranch went back to its ordinary sounds, and Reuben and Flora sat at the kitchen table with the coffee between them and the long afternoon light coming in low through the west-facing window. 60 days is a long time to be in a stranger's house, Flora said. You can stay here through all of it, Reuben said. The ranch accounts have not been properly maintained in 2 years, and Ernesto mentioned this morning that you reorganized the entire supply ledger before noon, which Ernesto had failed to do correctly twice before. You have a skill that this place needs, and I have space and safety to offer, and that is a fair exchange by any measure. You keep constructing reasonable arrangements, Flora said. There was something in her voice that was not quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. I find it is a useful habit, Reuben said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, What happens after 60 days? Reuben looked at his coffee cup and then at her. I have been thinking about that since yesterday afternoon, he said honestly. I think you already know what I would like the answer to be. But that is your decision, and I am not going to push it. Flora Medina had spent 14 months married to a man who made every decision that touched her life and called his right, and who treated the word husband as though it were a deed of ownership rather than a bond between two people. She sat across the kitchen table from a man who had spent $70 to give her back the ability to make her own decisions, and who had composed and dispatched a letter to a sheriff before the sun went down on the day they met, and who stood in a dark yard at 2 a.m, and spoken plainly and precisely until Coward turned his horse around, without one act of violence and without raising his voice. She had known her answer since the previous morning. She had spent the time since then examining it carefully to make sure she was choosing it for herself, and not simply because of the relief that came with being safe, because those were entirely different things, and Flora was clear-eyed enough to understand the distinction and patient enough to wait until she was certain. Ask me in 60 days, she said. I wanted to be a real answer and not an emergency one. That is fair, Reuben said. 63 days later, on a Thursday morning when the early light came in gold and flat across the top of the Red Rock Ridge, and the valley below was still in the last of the night's cold, Flora Medina became Flora Cross in a small ceremony at the Halston Courthouse with Ernesto and Marco Garza as witnesses and Sheriff Octavio Luna, who had made a point of being present, standing near the back wall with his hat in his hands. Flora took the name the way a person takes something they have deliberately chosen, with full understanding of what it was and what it was not. It was a beginning entered into freely, and Reuben understood that distinction from the moment he said, "Ask me in 60 days." The ranch account in Halston was updated that same afternoon to reflect two names where only one had existed before. The ledger books for the Cross Ranch were already in perfect order. They had been kept in perfect order since the third day of Flora's arrival, and they would remain that way